Okay, good afternoon everyone, thank you. Good afternoon everyone, welcome, and thank you for attending today's livecast. My name's Hannah Bain and I'm an assistant psychologist and I'll be chairing alongside my colleague Esther. Today's livecast will be on the topic of sleep, titled Let's Sleep on It. Before I hand you over to my colleague Esther for introductions, there are just a couple of bits of housekeeping that I'd like to run through. So can I just please ask that you keep your videos and microphones off, please? The format of today's session will be about 20 minutes conversation, which follows on from the previous Sleep Well and Carry On livecast. After this, we'll have a 20-minute section for questions, comments, and discussion. Please use the chat function if you have any questions or comments as we go through the discussion. And Esther and I will pick up conversations and questions during the second half. Please feel free to also pop your hand up during the second section of the livecast. Thank you. Esther, over to you.
Thanks, Hannah. So I'll just give a bit of background to Tom and Darren before they start. So Tom moved to the northeast from Kent for an assistant psychologist post in 1999. His first post was at the Colvin Unit, an adolescent forensic service, where he spent 3 years qualifying as a forensic psychologist. He then retrained as a clinical psychologist at Newcastle University. He has always had an interest in psychosis, and his first position post-qualifying was in EIP. He is currently the professional head for the psychosis pathway in the South locality. He does not consider himself a sleep expert, but felt a conversation about all things sleep would be an essential addition to the livecast programme. And Darren is a senior peer supporter and works for Northumberland Recovery Partnership Addiction Service. Darren has a passion to support people and offer hope to people struggling with substance and alcohol misuse. Darren moved up to the northeast 4 years ago and then began a new career helping people in addiction. So if I want to hand over to Tom and Darren, if you're ready to go ahead.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you so much.
Right, Tom. So Tom, how did your interest in sleep start?
Well, I've worked within the psychosis pathway for about the last 15 years, Darren, and psychosis and sleep have got a very close relationship. We know that if you go without sleep for as little as 24 hours, then psychotic symptoms can start to emerge. And then the longer you go without sleep beyond that, they rapidly develop. And we know from surveys of people with psychosis that about 80% of them have very poor sleep. And psychosis has historically been quite tough to treat. It's quite demanding an intervention. Hallucinations and delusions are quite hard to shift, demands quite a high level of expertise in order to treat it. And recent trials have tried to target associated psychological processes that go alongside psychosis. So recent trials have targeted sleep. And what we find is when we target sleep in this population, sleep improves, but also the psychosis improves. So a few years ago, we were lucky enough to have a trainee psychologist come on placement with us called Zoe Gotts, and she'd completed a PhD in CBT for insomnia with Jason Ellis at Northumbria University. And so on the back of that, we were able to procure some training from Jason locally for us, and he trained us in CBT for insomnia. And then we conducted a small feasibility study of being able to provide a much more nice concordant approach to sleep in our service to see how feasible it was in mainstream community treatment teams, and that was successful. And then more recently, I've been linking in with Kirsty Anderson from the regional sleep service, and she's been developing some online sleep and CBT for insomnia resources that we're about to release across CNTW. So I'm looking to help with evaluate that and help with the implementation of that.
Brilliant, really interesting. So do we all have sleepless nights, or when does it become a problem?
Well, I wonder whether we try something here, Darren. Could I ask if people on the call to put your hand up if you've ever had a sleepless night or a disruptive night of sleep? Because let's find out together. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, we all know the answer to it, but I think it's really helpful to see it visually, because sleepless nights, disturbed sleep, are just part of the normal human experience. It's completely universal, and it's one of the unfortunate things about sleep is that when we want it the most, when we need it the most, that's when it tends to be most disturbed. So, for example, if we have an interview the next day, when we think we really want to be rested and get a good night's sleep before it, or a presentation like this, then our sleep will likely be disturbed. So confession time, despite everything I'm going to say today, I didn't have a great night's sleep last night. And how was yours, Darren?
Not great.
So yeah, we know it's not great. So nervousness, we know, anticipatory anxiety interferes with sleep. But this is perfectly normal, and as we've seen on the call, everybody experiences that. That's just part of the human experience. But the difference between that and insomnia disorder. Insomnia disorder is characterized by 3 or more disrupted nights' sleep. So that's difficulty getting off to sleep or difficulty maintaining sleep for a period of 3 months or more. That's having interfering with your functioning in some way during that period, and is not caused by some other environmental factor, such as being a new parent or having noisy neighbours, for example. So sleep disturbance is having nights of sleep disturbance is very common. We've all had them. Insomnia disorder is different, but actually the prevalence of insomnia disorder is also very high. Around 10% of people have insomnia disorder at that marked degree, which is a very high prevalence rate. So sleep is something that many of us really struggle with.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose the ultimate subject is, so how has the pandemic affected our sleep?
Well, if we think about Arthur Spielman's model of insomnia, it's a 3 Ps model. So predisposing, precipitating, and perpetuating factors. And so if you think about predisposition, we are all, to a greater or lesser extent, good or bad sleepers. So we all know people who can fall asleep at the drop of a hat and nothing disturbs them. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's people that take forever to get off to sleep, and then they're easily disturbed through the night and their sleep is often broken. But no matter whether you're a good or a bad sleeper, we all are vulnerable to insomnia given enough precipitating factors or triggers. And so when you think about what we've all gone through this past year, we've gone through a multitude of triggers that would disrupt our sleep. So if you think about the stress and anxiety and the worry that we've all gone through, both about the virus itself and the impact that it might have on us or our friends or loved ones, or other aspects of our life that it might impact on. And Mark Prieston talked about the worry and uncertainty that comes through with the pandemic, the last Livecast. Stress and anxiety we know impacts on sleep, but also many of our outlets for stress and anxiety have been reduced. So in terms of our ability to get respite, so many of us have been trapped in the same home without being able to have a break from each other over the past year. A lot of our hobbies and interests have been curtailed because we're not able to do them. Many of us can't exercise in the way that we would like to. Many of us haven't been able to socialise in the way we'd like to. So not only has stress increased, also our coping strategies have also been reduced, which is a huge double whammy. And then if you think about all the change and disruption that we've gone through over the past year, we've gone through not just one transition, we've gone through multiple changes and transitions over the past year. And one of the things that sleep loves is routine, structure, predictability. It does not like your routine and a lot of upheaval, but of course that's what we've gone through this past year. And then there's a lot of unforeseen consequences to a lot of this stuff that we don't think about, such as what time do you leave the house now? So for many of us, we've worked from home, and the first time we might leave the house might be in the afternoon because we just turn on our laptops and start working. But we know that exposure to natural light, especially early in the morning, helps sleep. But for many of us, we haven't realised, but that's been reduced and that's impacting on our sleep. And all of this stuff has disrupted our natural body clocks, which help govern sleep. So it's a very long way of saying it's no surprise that all the surveys globally over the past year have shown that insomnia has gone through the roof. Rates of insomnia have gone through the roof, and it's been named COVID-somnia or corona-somnia. And they're talking about around a 30% rise across the globe in terms of rates of insomnia increasing. So the short answer is the pandemic has enormously impacted on our sleep.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, the pandemic's been huge, and I'm sure people that didn't have disrupted sleep has definitely been affected.
Yeah.
So for people in that category, will our sleep return to normal?
Well, I think a few things to say about that. One is that human beings are incredibly resilient. And so what happens is we experience challenges and transitions and our sleep gets disturbed, but naturally, without any intervention, our sleep should naturally return to normal. And that is the experience for the vast majority of people. One of the difficulties has been over the last year is that it hasn't just been one transition and change or challenge. It's been multiple transitions and changes and challenges periodically throughout the year. So we've had to continually adapt, but we are amazing at it. And for most of us, yes, our sleep naturally returns to normal. But there's a few things I want to say about it. One is that if you are struggling with sleep, I wouldn't be waiting until the pandemic resolves or until we go back to the new normal, whatever that is, before doing something about it, because we know that insomnia, particularly chronic insomnia, makes your existence very, very difficult and challenging. It's like wading through treacle in your day. Sleep affects almost every aspect of the human experience, from how you feel physically, how well you feel in yourself. It impacts on every mental health disorder. It affects your cognitive capacity. It even affects your chances of having a car crash the next day from poor sleep. Every aspect of your human experience is affected by sleep. And I would say there's no need to put up with it, because there's now over the last 10 years, there's an explosion in self-help material out there that's very high quality, that can give you lots of good ideas about how to get your sleep.
Yeah.
Not to suffer in silence. If sleep is really disturbing you and it's making your life miserable, the NHS has got a very effective treatment in CBT for insomnia, and I would say seek help.
Yeah. So what are your top tips, Tom, for sleep?
Well, before I jump in with any, have you got any, Darren? I'll put you on the spot.
Not using your phone. I mean, I've had struggled with sleep on and off for years. I go through periods of good and bad. But I mean, we all say it and then we still do it. As you're using your phone or looking at a screen. It definitely helps me when I don't. So I have a cut-off time, and the light, is trying to make it adaptable. Low light, because it definitely has affected me in the past. Keep me awake. Yeah,
it's a really good tip, and we know that technology is just insidiously crept into our bedrooms, and all of us are on our phones in bed, and it's a terrible habit. So yeah, I think there's a lot of very simple steps that people can take to give yourself, increase the odds of you getting a good night's sleep. And one of them is keeping technology out of the bedroom. Absolutely. And other things that are like that collectively would be termed sleep hygiene is, again, people will know many of these: reducing caffeine intake in the afternoons and evenings, reducing alcohol intake in the evening, regular meals throughout the day, but not eating before bed, making sure your sleeping environment is as dark as possible, making sure it's a bit cooler than you might think. Around 18 degrees Celsius is generally speaking a good temperature for falling asleep. Generally speaking, that all those good tips for sleep, termed sleep hygiene, they don't tend to be very good at treating insomnia disorder, but they do give you a good chance of everything else working. So we do have other things that do have a good evidence base for treating insomnia. So one of them is exercise. So over recent years, a few trials have demonstrated that just exercise alone, if you did nothing else to help you sleep, you just did exercise and ignored everything else that I'm talking about in terms of sleep, it would improve your sleep. It's got a very emerging and encouraging effect size in helping sleep. And the rule of thumb is 20 minutes a day, high intensity, doesn't matter what type of exercise, doesn't matter what time of day, as long as it's not a few hours before bed, will improve your sleep for most people. But there's also other things that you can do. One is that having a sleep routine. So going to bed at the same time every night, getting up at the same time every day. Sleep loves routine and predictability. You want your brain to be expecting sleep when it hits a certain time of night and you approach the bedroom, and you want that by having predictability. So the same thing every night, and having a wind down routine that is priming your brain to expect sleep is coming now. And equally, getting up at the same time every day enormously aids sleep. But that does mean no lie-ins at weekends, I'm afraid, everybody. And it also means, which is very hard, getting up at the same time every day, no matter how well or badly you've slept. So whether you have a good night's sleep or a bad night's sleep, you still get up at whatever time it is. So sleep, a lot of it is about conditioning, and you want to be conditioning yourself to be sleeping in bed and through having a sleep routine. The other thing to do is not to lie in bed awake. So we talk about the rule of thumb being 15 minutes. Don't lie in bed for longer than 15 minutes because all you're doing is associating your bed with being awake. And then the next night you go to bed, and as you walk into your bedroom and towards your bed, your brain will be thinking, this is the place where we laid awake last night. So you want to break that association by getting out of bed, doing something relaxing like watching a movie or TV or reading a book. And then when you're sleepy, and by sleepy I mean nodding off sleepy, go back to bed. It's easy to say, but it's very hard to do, to get out of bed at 3 in the morning. I know it's very difficult to do. The other thing to say is not to chase sleep. So this is very difficult to do, especially when we really want sleep. It's very tempting to stay in bed and try to sleep. But we know that the more we try to sleep, it's one of the ironies of sleep, is that the more we try to sleep, the more we want to sleep, the worse we sleep. And if you interview people who sleep very well, they put no effort into their sleep. They have no interest in their sleep. And it's a big part of why we think they sleep well. And often very poor sleepers, it's the opposite. They're trying everything that they can to get the best night's sleep. You can use that information to flip it on its head with something we call paradoxical intention, which is you try to stay awake. And if you do that, sleep can naturally find you. So the way to do that is you lie in bed. So everyone on the call could try this tonight. You lie in bed, and rather than close your eyes, you try and keep your eyes open for as long as you possibly can. And when you feel your eyelids feeling heavy or drooping, you try and keep them open for as long as you can. Your intention should be, how long can I keep my eyes open for? It's an amazingly powerful technique that allows sleep to find you, rather than you trying to find sleep. Trying to find sleep is like a drive state, which is an arousal state that interferes with sleep. And when it doesn't work, you get frustrated, which is another arousal state, which again interferes with sleep. So not chasing sleep is a big tip. And then the last thing to say is if all of those have failed, and if you're finding that your sleep is fragmented over the course of a night, we use something in CBT for insomnia called sleep compression, where you compress your sleep window. So if you go to bed at, say, 10 o'clock at night and you get up at 7 a.m. the next day, typically, we would squeeze that window. So we would say, let's keep you getting up at 7 a.m., but we'll push your bedtime back to 11 p.m. or midnight, and we squeeze that window for sleep. And it tends to compress sleep, and it doesn't give you more sleep typically, but it does give you less fragmented sleep and better quality sleep. And it starts to get you a better relationship with sleep. You start to nod off quicker, stay asleep for longer. And then once you've established that, you can begin to expand your window again and find out where your limits are, what your ideal sleep window should be. So there's lots and lots of things that you can do to make a difference to sleep that I've just done a very quick whistle-stop tour of.
Yeah, some real good tips there, Tom. What does therapy for sleep look like?
Say again?
What does therapy for sleep look like?
Well, it runs through a lot of the tips that I've just run through.
Yes.
It runs through a lot of those things, but in 6 structured sessions, typically delivered. It can be delivered one-to-one or in group work, or it can be delivered online. And typically it runs through all of those tips, but it does something called measuring your sleep efficiency, which is looking at the percentage of time that you're asleep when you're in bed and trying to improve that through sleep restriction or sleep compression, as I've just described. So, for example, if you're asleep for 8 hours and you're in bed for 10 hours, your sleep efficiency would be 80%. And that's a good sleep efficiency, 80%. But many people I see in my clinic, their sleep percentage would be more like, sleep efficiency would be more like 40%. So we try to improve that by compressing their sleep window. And we do that week by week as we run through all those other aspects that I've just talked about in terms of the tips. And typically it's around 6 sessions weekly that it can be delivered across a whole range of platforms. One of the things I would say about it is it's very effective. It's got a very strong evidence base for improving sleep, and it's very prescriptive. It looks the same pretty much no matter who comes through the doors and talks about sleep. You still run through the same process, which is a bit different to some of the other treatments that we might offer. Brilliant. And it's quick. 6 weeks is very quick as well.
Yeah, that's good. So where can people find out more about sleep, Tom?
Well, there's a number of over the last 10 years, there's been an explosion in self-help material. So there's some excellent self-help books I'd recommend. Colin Espy's Introduction to Coping with Insomnia is excellent. Kirsty Anderson's How to Beat Insomnia, or Jason Ellis's The 1 Week Insomnia Cure. Most of them guide you through what I've described. They talk you through a CBTI program essentially, but in a self-help book. But they tend to be very cheap. You can buy them for under a tenner, and they stick to the principles of CBTI and in a very helpful, well-written, well-presented way. There's also been a huge growth in the last few years of online CBT for insomnia programs and apps that support it. Probably the most well-known one is Sleepio. And then, of course, we've got a lot of access to expertise and services that provide CBT for insomnia within CNTW. Most IAP services provide CBTI. And then the sleep regional service that Kirsty Anderson heads up treats sleep apnea and other sleep disorders. They're the expert, and they host a sleep study day every year. People can sign up to that, and there's one coming up in June, which again goes through some of the things I've talked through, but in much greater depth over a day. So the sleep study days are excellent that they host. And then CNTW's got a lot of material itself. So the Sleeping Well leaflet is excellent that we've got. And via the Trust intranet, if you go via SharePoint, there's a Sleep Well resource, which has a lot of information about sleep that's helpful as part of the project that's improved sleep in the inpatient wards across the Trust. And then we're about to launch the online CBTI and sleep training program, for that Kirsty Jansen's developed. So that's going to be released hopefully very soon. So watch this space.
Yeah, brilliant. There's lots to access, isn't there?
Yeah, it's fantastic. There's a lot more than there was a few years ago.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And finally, Tom, how was your sleep?
My sleep, well, I have no trouble dropping off to sleep, Darren. So that's always fine. And generally, I'm an okay sleeper. But if something's on my mind or I'm stressed about something, my vulnerability is early morning waking, which is not much fun. And even though I've preached all those good habits, I'm just as bad as anyone else in terms of like having too many coffees in the day or checking my phone at night in my bed. So, and I know when I've drifted into doing those things, yeah, of course, they negatively impact my sleep. But just because I know all this stuff doesn't mean I always do it. How's yours generally?
Quite similar to yours. It's okay. Like I say, I do go through periods. It's good at the moment. Last night wasn't the greatest, but like you say, it's when there's things, you're doing stuff, and but yeah, exactly the same. We all have bad habits, but not too bad at the minute, Tom.
That's good. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you, Tom.
That was brilliant and really interesting. I think we've all got some good sleep tips now. Are you happy to move on to sort of the question section now?
Yes, please, Esther.
Okay, brilliant. It looks like we've got one question in the chat, but if anyone else wants to ask any, pop them in the chat or pop your hand up and we'll come to you. So Kay has asked, how does shift work fit in with sleep?
It's an excellent question, Kay. And the short answer is it's not conducive to sleep. What we know is that shift work over a long period of time is not something that we naturally adapt to. So our body clocks don't naturally adapt to working different shifts. So it's a very difficult thing to treat. So something called circadian rhythm disorder, which is where people could sleep if they were given the right opportunities to, but they can't because of some environmental aspect that won't allow them to, so such as jet lag or shift work. So of course there's different things in which you could try. So all of the things that I've talked about today, you can still try those with shift work, but ultimately you're working against your natural body clock that's telling you sleep at night, wake during the day, and keep that stable over a long period of time, which shift work naturally disrupts. And there's things like light therapy and melatonin, and treating some of the comorbid difficulties or unhelpful sleep behaviours that I've just described. All those things can help, but ultimately you are working against the natural process that the human body does not adapt to naturally. And so we know that long-term shift work, people's brains are 10 years older after chronic long-term shift work, and we think a big part of that is the sleep deprivation that comes from it. So it's a big risk factor that makes things very difficult for people.
Thanks, Tom, and also thanks just to say for the conversation. It's been a pleasure to hear. We've got a question here. How does menopause affect sleep, and what can you do to help that? I'm not there yet, but a lot of my friends struggle.
I don't know the answer to that. That's a really good question. I wonder if we open the call up to see if anybody knows the response to that, if they've had experience of going through the menopause or things that have helped with their sleep, because we've got about 50 people on the call. No. Or sorry, who's asked the question, Hannah? Because I wonder whether they might elaborate on what they found helpful and what hasn't made a difference.
They are called. No, she's called Jenny.
Jenny.
Hello. Yes.
Hello.
It's not a problem for me because I'm not there yet. I'm too young, luckily. But obviously I've got loads of my friends at the minute that are really, really struggling, and they've tried loads of the things that you've suggested with sleep hygiene, and a friend of mine's also tried the sleep shrinking thing. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but I didn't know if there was anything extra that people could, I don't know what else there is to help, or why it's such a problem at that stage in life.
Yes, I don't know the answer to that, but if anyone does on the call, please put your hand up and respond. But also, I think we'll be able to send out the recording to everyone who's attended this call, so we can have a little look into it, Jenny, and come back to you and attach it to the recording that we send out.
Thank you.
I think Neil has his hand up.
Yeah, I haven't personally experienced menopause, but my wife has insisted on the bedroom window being open every night, and that has helped her enormously since she entered that particular phase of her sleep problems. So I think it has been worse during this period of her life, but certainly having a cooler bedroom and me staying out of the bedroom while she's dropping off is also helpful. She doesn't like if I've fallen asleep before she has.
So there we are, a cooler bedroom, which is interesting, isn't it? Because we talked a little bit about that earlier, but also not having your partner in the bedroom might also help.
There's also been some advice in the chat as well. Someone said that Davina McCall did a good documentary broadcast this week, so maybe people want to check that out. And someone said cotton bedding and again a fan, so I think keeping cool as well.
Yeah, there we go. So generally, one of the things that we've seen over the last 50 years is sleep has generally dropped from around 8 hours a night to more like 6.5 hours a night. And in terms of our human evolution, that's a huge drop in the space of a very, very small period of time. And we all know lots of reasons for that, which include our modern Western lifestyles. But one of the reasons we think is the advancement of central heating in modern industrialized society, where everything's much warmer. We don't realize that that's impacting our sleep, because everything's about 3-4 degrees hotter than it was 50 years ago, and we think that's interfering with our sleep. So it sounds like that might be particularly relevant for someone with menopause. But we can link the Davina McCall program and any information we have about it when we circulate the recording of the event.
If I can say that we've also turned the radiator off in our bedroom, so it hasn't been on for a number of months now, ever, not even during the daytime or anything.
Is that okay for you, Neil?
Yeah, that's fine. Yes, absolutely no problem. I just snuggle under the bedclothes more.
Yeah. Well, generally we sleep better cooler.
We've got another question. We've got a question from Phil. Is sleep like credit or debit? So can I get back a few hours at the weekend if I miss some in the week?
No, it's not a good idea. So sleep, you don't want to be, you can't bank up longer night's sleep over the weekend and then get away with sleepless nights during the week. We know that people's functioning is affected from just one night's bad sleep, and like I described to you, even your vulnerability to psychosis goes within 24 hours. But also, you don't want to be banking up sleep at the weekend and then sleepiness during the week. You want to be keeping your sleep routine stable throughout the week. So same time to bed, same time getting up, no matter whether it's weekend or during the day. So it's not a good idea to try and bank sleep and then get away with shorter sleep during the week. It's better to try and have a set routine and structure that you keep to, weekends included. So when people come in for sleep work, often we ask them to keep a diary for at least 10 days to cover the working week, but also weekends, because we're asking them to keep it constant throughout. Good question.
We've got another question. Is melatonin legal in this country now? I know that you couldn't buy it a few years ago.
Well, we know we prescribe it. I'm not a medic, so I don't. So we know it gets prescribed. We know it's probably enormously overprescribed, and psychological treatments are underprescribed, if we call it that. So we know pharmacological treatments are generally the first thing that's considered in services, but actually before anything psychological is offered. And the reason for that is they're so cheap compared to what we would offer. But I think I read last year that in the trust it was 1.5 million we used prescribing melatonin, with very little evidence of anything psychological being offered to people for sleep. But I don't know if it's legal to buy. I'm presuming it's obviously you can prescribe it, whether it's legal to buy over the counter. Does anyone know that on the call? It's a good question. Or who was it who asked the question, Esther?
It was Neil.
Yes, it was me, and I speak from the experience of being a drug mule, of bringing bottles back from the States where you can buy it, with people saying, "Oh, if you go into the States, you can get me some melatonin, please."
Right. Have you used it? Has it been effective for you?
I personally have never used it because I don't have that. My sleep problems come when I'm stressed, so I just try to reduce my stress. My wife has found it very helpful at times, but she doesn't do it. She doesn't take it for long periods. If she's struggling for a little bit, she gets it out and uses it.
Yes, that's right. And we haven't really mentioned pharmacological treatments. We've focused on, I suppose, psychological approaches and CBT for insomnia today. But of course, yes, there's a range of medications that are regularly prescribed for sleep, such as the benzodiazepines or zopiclone, or as Neil mentions, melatonin. And they've all got an evidence base for treating insomnia, but we know that psychological treatments like CBT for insomnia can have longer lasting effects. We know that they're associated with less side effects generally. And we know that in general, people prefer psychological approaches to pharmacological approaches. Although, again, those meds can be very helpful for, particularly like Neil described, short-term use, which is really what they're licensed for.
I'm not sure if this has been covered in what you've just said, Tom, but there was someone saying that it's great to hear lots of techniques and interventions to support better sleep. So thank you for that. It was noticeable that sleeping tablets were not part of the solution. Are the tips and interventions the same, or are there any additional tips for people who still use sleepers?
Yes, they are the same. But what we generally advise people is to, when they start doing a structured sleep intervention, is to stick with whatever medication regime that they've got throughout the treatment. So it's just not to change it. And then on the back of the treatment, they may want to amend their pharmacological treatments. So if people are using a sleeping pill at the start, we don't advise them to taper off as we do the treatment. We say stick with it, or they stop it before you start. And then you keep it consistent throughout the treatment. I mean, the idea is really that you're trying to help people create a healthier relationship with their sleep and with their bed by the end of treatment, and ultimately have less dependency on needing a pill in order to have more natural sleep, or again, a more natural relationship with sleep and their bed. Really, by the time people have come for treatment with CBT for insomnia, they've started to hate their bed and hate going to sleep. And it's become going up to bed has become a period of dread for them. And we want to really shift that and turn that on its head, where it's some place they look forward to because they know they're going to sleep. And they know this is a place where all they do is sleep. So we want to really flip that on its head with treatment. And so at the end of the CBT for insomnia, many people are not getting much more sleep, but they have changed their relationship with sleep. They know when they go to bed, they will fall asleep, and they know when they go to bed, they're more likely to stay asleep. When it be less fragmented, it'll be higher quality sleep, and they feel much happier, not because they're getting more sleep necessarily, but they're lying in bed for less time feeling frustrated and angry that they're not getting off to sleep. And once you change that relationship with your bed and sleep, you're then more likely to get more sleep. But you have to shift that relationship first. But coming back to the question, stick the medication you just stick with whatever regime it is at the start, and then they can decide at the end if they want to shift it.
Also, if people haven't seen, Richard has replied about melatonin. He's found on Google that in the UK, all forms of melatonin are prescription-only medicines and are only available from the pharmacy when they've been prescribed by a registered doctor. So that's that answered. I think we've still got a couple of more questions in the chat. So Dawn has asked, what about cat naps and siestas? Would you view these as beneficial when nighttime sleep is not so good?
Yeah, it's a really great question, because I think historically, in evolutionary terms, tens of thousands of years ago, humanity was more commonly polyphasic sleepers. We would sleep over different periods of the day, and actually, my heritage is Greek Cypriot, and all my relatives in Cyprus, they all take a siesta during the day, and we know that that happens across multiple cultures. And I think the question is as much environmental. Does it fit with the lifestyle and the culture that's around you as much as anything else? So if it does, as it does in Spain or Greece or Cyprus, for example, then I think that's fine. But I think you mentioned the other thing is if your sleep is disturbed in the evening, then it's probably best not to have a cat nap in the afternoon. What we talk about is the two things that really govern sleep. There's only two fundamental processes that govern sleep. One is your body clock, and we've mentioned that already, which is trying to sleep when it's nighttime and staying awake during the day. So you want your body clock to match your circadian rhythm to match night and day. So that's one of the things that governs sleep. We're primed to fall asleep when it's night and wake during the day. And the other thing is building up your sleep bank, as we call it. So in other words, that means the longer you've gone without sleep, the more likely you are to sleep, very simply put. So the solution to that is get up early and then don't nap during the day. And you're building up your sleep bank. And so if you have a cat nap, the way I would describe it is it's like having a small meal or having a piece of bread before your main meal. You're reducing your appetite, you're not as hungry. You have a cat nap, it's like reducing your sleep bank, so you're less likely. Some people, it's fine, but for many people who come through sleep work that I do, I advise them to reduce it or drop it entirely if their sleep is disturbed at night, and then we find out together whether it makes a difference.
Thanks, Thomas. I think we've got one more question here from Phil, and it runs along a similar theme to culture and routine. People living in hotter countries adapt around the heat of the day, sleeping or resting around midday and eating later in the evening. I guess this is about routines and cultural expectations, but is sleep better or worse compared to cooler climates?
It's a really good question, which again, I'm not sure I know the full answer to. But I suspect that their sleep is probably adapted to those conditions, both culturally and in evolutionary terms. I suspect it's probably the equivalent of sleep in cooler climates. But you're absolutely right, is that a lot of our sleep problems are due to the cultural environment around us. And so we know that, for example, teenagers are naturally night owls, but school hours don't allow them to go to bed late and then lie in late, even though we know that that's what their body clock is asking them for. And similarly, like we described about shift work, is that it's an environmental problem or cultural problem as much as it is an individual one. So ideally, what you want is your environment to match whatever conditions best meet your sleep needs. And in many cultures, that will be that. But as we've seen, sleep has dramatically reduced globally by about an hour and a half over the last 50 years. So I don't know what the difference is cross-culturally, but it's a good question.